Welcome to another episode of Pour and Tell. I'm your host, John, the cigar surgeon, here as always with... Who am I with? I'm with Jiunn. You probably don't even recognize this anymore. We took a few weeks off. Holidays, New Year, but we're back to our regular scheduled bi-weekly programming.
But we did not stop drinking. We drank more the last few weeks.
It's true. There was a lot of drinking over the holidays. There was a lot of drinking after the holidays. Pretty much, with the weather being what it is up here, the drinking just doesn't stop. Yeah.
Me too. And it's not nearly as bad as what you're facing, but nonetheless. It is. I mean, it's been the holidays, right? Like, drastically increases.
Yeah, it really does. And, not sometimes it's not necessarily cracking the good stuff, although we did get into some tealing single or a small batch over the holidays with the family, and managed to introduce some people at the family who otherwise wouldn't drink fine Irish whiskey. So I consider that to be a win.
Nice. Yeah. Speaking of fine Irish whiskey, super underrated in my opinion. So underrated is the bad thing to say, because a ton of people in America, especially, they shoot Jameson. So they actually do sell quite a bit of Irish whiskey, not the Jameson, people that shoot. But in general, like Irish whiskey kind of gets a bad rep in general. Like, I don't know about you in Canada, but like in the States, right? Like the guys that end up know Irish whiskey, you know what I mean? Like vast majority is like Middleton, right? Like Powers, Jameson, etc., Redbreast, which, all really good stuff. But people don't have a fond appreciation for Irish whiskey, I feel like, as opposed to like, the Scotches of the world, Japanese whiskeys, the American bourbon and rye. It's a shame. Anyways, off the rant.
No, it's good, and I agree with you. I think that, commercially, the Irish have been distilling longer than anybody else. They unfortunately have gone through some downturns, and really, I think the state of it is the reason that Irish whiskey isn't as big as it is around the world in comparing to some of the blended Scotches is just because the Scots nailed the marketing, and that's really, it has nothing to do with the superiority of spirit. The Irish whiskeys that are out there, there's some really, really good Irish whiskeys. Teeling happens to be my favorite right now, but there's tons of really nice Irish whiskeys that are out there. So get the chance, give some Irish whiskey some love. But let's talk about given that it was the holidays, you've probably got some pours stored up. I know I've got like 17 of them or something crazy.
Man, yeah. So throughout the holidays, I think the last time we talked to you guys, everyone on here, was before Christmas holiday, right?
Yeah.
It's definitely before Christmas holiday. So basically throughout like Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, and then that New Year's kind of week, I guess, a lot of good beer with my cousin. I have this cousin that is super into beer, and he brought out Goose Island's Bourbon County Stout, a vertical, ranging from 2013 all the way to the 2019 batch. So we went through 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We went through 7 bottle vertical of that, which is super interesting, right? Like in general, you hear about like barrel aged stouts and how they may not last that long. Like you hear maybe they last like in the right proper conditions. Of course, it's a lot better, right? But to drink something that was 7 years old, that's a barrel aged stout, and to still retain the flavors. As a matter of fact, the 13 was probably one of my favorites within the 7-year vertical. Still had a ton of character. It definitely smoothed out. You don't get so much of that bitter chocolate, but I felt like it was more like a milky, creamier chocolate. Still had that really nice cherry, kind of cream cherry stone fruit that I got. And it was awesome, and it was doing it within like people that really dig beer, which is always a good thing, right?
Yeah.
So that was probably the highlight on the beer front. I know how some people feel about Goose Island. They sold out, blah blah blah. But hey, guys, it's good beer is good beer, right? Like, you bash me if you want, but I still buy a Bourbon County Stout when it releases every year. I try one. Okay. But I drink way more to pat myself. I drink way more craft beer than I do, big brand beer. So, anyways, now that I feel justified about drinking conglomerate beer, on the whiskey side, had a lot, man. I had on the bourbon aspect of things. I was very lucky to get a bottle of Pappy Van Winkle 15-year-old this year. So I picked it up. I actually ended up paying about double the MSRP, which I'm not complaining about. So I ended up paying like $250 or so.
Still pretty reasonable.
Still incredibly reasonable, knowing that secondary market is fetching for like $1,400-$1,500 for this bottle easily. I did not open it, but based upon looking at the laser etching, it is a 19 bottle, so I'm excited about that. In terms of the actual pours, I had a good mix of American. Specifically, I had a Stag Junior that comes out of Buffalo Trace. I had their summer 2019 batch. And this is the batch that when you guys are checking out reviews lately, like whether it be like Breaking Bourbon or Reddit or any of those like more popular sites that review especially bourbon, it's highly raved. And most people say, well, a lot of people say that it's equivalent to just regular Buffalo Trace Antigua Collections Stag. And I totally agree. I think it's super heavy in proof. It's 132 proof, 66% alcohol, but you do not taste that barrel ethanol, like that heat. I think that's one of the first things that I recognized about it. I get a ton of tart cherries out of it, a ton of cream, vanilla, your typical bourbon kind of a caramel thing going on. Loved it. I also drank from Buffalo Trace Antique Collection, William LaRue Weller. I drank the 2018 bottle, which is the only bottle that I have. This is a heater. This is, barrel proof, 128 proof. Then again, freaking amazing. I'm almost out of this bottle, and I'm pretty sure I'm not going to get another bottle this year because of those other fantastic bourbon hunters out there that don't fucking drink it. Just kidding. I'm just a little curmudgeon. Another thing that I drank, Bellmead Cask Strength. So this is Bellmead American bourbon. What they do for these bottlings is they source from Indiana, specifically MGP, and they source these bourbons from MGP, and then they blend them, and then they bottle at a barrel strength. I would say Bellmead has quickly been my favorite go-to cask strengths for something that's readily still somewhat available, which is about $60 a bottle. On the Scotch front, I drank.
You really didn't mess around.
Yeah, on the Scotch front, I had a Lagavulin Distillery edition. This is from distilled in '97, bottled in 2013. So this is, I bought this a few years ago. I'm about halfway through this bottle, and I still don't like it. It's been so many fucking years.
I feel like you've given it the PhD college try.
Right? I'm super excited about anything especially Lagavulin that's kind of the special allocated kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
But this bottle just does not have depth and character. It's just basically one note of your moss, peat, campfire smoke. The finish is lacking. The body and depth is highly lacking. And it's just so one-dimensional. Highly disappointing. That's all.
Well, I mean, like I said, I think if you've gone through half the bottle, I don't know how much more of it. I mean, if you've done half a bottle and you still don't like it, that's pretty much in the bag at that point.
Make cocktails, I guess. I don't know.
That's a lot of pours. Is that? Yeah. Are you done? You good?
Yeah, I'm done.
That's good. We'll have to talk in a future show about stout aging because I agree with you. I think I basically look at my beers and when I'm looking at aging. And aging can sometimes mean forced aging, and aging can sometimes mean I got a little out of control at the bottle shop and bought more than I can possibly drink in the near future. And what is going to age for me is high ABV stuff. And by high ABV, I mean 9.5 and up. If it's over 10, all the better. If it's over 12, then we're off to the races. But we can certainly have I think it's one of the great topics where we can have an entire show dedicated to it, because I've got a few, like the Westfalens and some of the old St. Ambrose Russian Imperial Stouts. One of the Russian Imperial Stouts I have, I think, has like 7 or 8 years on it. And I mean, it's just, I'm so excited to crack it. That's one of the ones we cracked at the 2 shows ago in Vegas, is one of the old Russian Imperial Stouts. So
2 shows ago, I was there.
Yeah. So I'll have to bring one down.
What brewery was this again?
It's St. Ambrose out of Quebec.
Okay.
Yeah,
Oh man.
Yeah, it's really, really good. I mean, their stouts are good fresh, but you get like 5-6 years of age on them, and they're magic. Anyways, I could talk barrel aging and forced aging of beers and stouts.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
I've got a lot to get through myself, so I'll just jump in it. So I have a really good friend. He knows who he is, Joel. And Joel is as much or more of a whiskey/Scotch fiend than I am. So for Christmas, I got to pour a vertical of Edradour, and it was a pretty insane vertical. It was the 17 Bordeaux cask, so 17-year Bordeaux cask, the 18-year Barolo cask, and the 21-year-old cherry cask. And Edradour is not inexpensive to begin with. So when you start getting to the 17, 18, 21-year range, I mean, if I had to hazard a guess, I think that's probably in the neighborhood of $1,500 to $2,000 worth of whiskey that I'm tasting. Obviously, I'm not drinking the whole bottle. I'm taking a polite pour. And
gentleman's dram.
Gentleman's dram. It's like, no, I'll only take a half ounce. Thank you. Thank you, sir. So walking our audience through it, the 17 is 55.8% ABV, finished in a Bordeaux cask, which is wine. And it just had a really huge finish for me. I think that was one of the big favorites of the night. That Bordeaux, it was one of those whiskeys where you sip it and you go to grab your glass because you're like, oh, that was really good. And then the finish hits you and it just goes and goes and goes and goes and goes. And I would say maybe the neighborhood of 1 to 2 minutes on the finish. So like just monster. The interesting one was the 18, which ended up kind of being the redheaded stepchild. It was good, but it was pigeonholed between 2 really amazing whiskeys. So if I'd tasted it on its own, I would have said, this is really great whiskey. But between 2 excellent whiskeys, it ended up being sort of very good. It was the Edradour 18, which is 56.5% ABV. Spends 12 years in an ex-bourbon cask and then 6 years in a Barolo cask. And I think it just didn't have this. I think it's one of those things where it just doesn't have enough character compared to the 17 and the 21. I mean, like I said, on its own, very, very good whiskey. I just think it lacked a defining quality to say, what is it about that 18 that makes it unique? And lastly, the 21, which, Jesus, this whiskey was just ridiculous. Poured blood red, I kid you not, 56.2% ABV. They do a bourbon fill, and then they finish it. They age it for the rest of the time in a first fill Oloroso sherry. So, I mean,
and you said it's like blood red.
Oh, it's blood red. Like I don't know the last time I've seen outside of maybe the Amaret Intermediate Sherry. I don't know that I've seen a lot of whiskeys that are this red. I mean, again, color's not necessarily indicative of anything, but in this case, I think it's definitely imparting how long it's been spending in a sherry cask. And needless to say, it's just, it's the sherried whiskey now to compare against. So the next time I try something that's sherry, it's like, okay, well, you have to be better than the Edradour 21 because that's like peak sherry cask. So, if we're rating out of a 10-point scale, that's the 9.5. So something has to come along to compete. It was great. It was really enjoyable.
I don't think I've ever heard of this brand.
It's a pretty small distillery up until recently. Like when I went to Scotland, which was 5 years ago now, they really weren't available outside of Canada or outside of Scotland, except for private bottling. So and then really it's just because they're so small and they just don't make a lot of volume. So I think their normal casks their normal bottles are certainly highly prized. And obviously you get into the really aged stuff, then, these are coveted and obviously very expensive because there's very small quantity. I also went to a whiskey tasting, which coincidentally, I'm also going to whiskey tasting tomorrow. For those who aren't aware, we're pre-recording this January 15th. So on January 16th, my lovely wife got me a Christmas whiskey tasting, and it's one of the largest whiskey festivals that's here, and it's going to be out of control. It's actually 2 floors of whiskey tasting to give you a sense of just how many whiskeys. So I'm going to have to try and take notes. I'm sure that they will become illegible after about my 10th whiskey or whatever that might be.
Where's the, do you know roughly how many vendors?
I think there's 300 bottles being poured.
Oh.
So, yeah, I don't even know the full scope because I wanted to kind of keep it a little blind, but there's a lot of product. So one of the bottle shops that I frequent, Kensington Wine Market, one of my favorite bottle shops, they do a advent calendar, and they had a tasting of the whiskeys that were in the advent calendar, which I thought was kind of cool. So I got invited to that, and it was a really nice event. And of course, I wrote some notes down, but as the night goes on, it just gets a little ridiculous. So I'll just kind of quickly run down the list of what I tasted and what I kind of wrote down. So there was a Ben Nevis, which was a 1996 Kensington Wine Market cask. I can't remember how old it was. I think it was 21 years old. That was a really nice whiskey. Glenfarclas 21. Glenfarclas, I think, is one of the big underrated, undervalued whiskeys in the marketplace for what it is. Like, I think you can still get the 21 for under $400, which is absurd.
That's interesting you say that. I was going to say the opposite about Glenfarclas. I was going to say Glenfarclas is that Highland whiskey in which you could like wow most people with the age statement, but at a really good cost.
Yeah, I mean that's
that kind of taste.
That's that's not unfair. I mean it's not it's not an upper echelon whiskey in terms of the flavor profile, but I think what it offers at the price point makes it a good value, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure.
They also have some Arrans there. They've actually had a long-standing relationship. I think they might have been one of the first places to ever get a shop bottling from the distillery back in the day. At any rate, when I see an Arran, I kind of run over. So they had a Sauternes, which I hadn't had before. That was really interesting. Sauternes offers a really interesting kind of dry, fruity finish to it. Then they had one, which I think they said was it might have been a airport exclusive. But again, at this point, I already had like 8 whiskeys or something like that. At any rate, it's the Arran Explorers Lochranza Castle 21. And interestingly, it uses a type of sherry that I've never heard of before. It's a I knew I was going to mess it up. Amontillado sherry casks. And I asked a lot of questions because I'd never heard of an Amontillado sherry before, but it's an intermediate sherry that sits somewhere between a Fino cask and an Oloroso cask, and the classification is actually a dry wine because it has a really low sugar content.
Interesting.
Yeah. So
that sounds terrible to finish a whiskey in.
It was interesting. I mean,
was it like dry and
no, it was still fruity. I think it lacked the spice of Oloroso or Pedro Jimenez, but whatever. For me, it's like I hear sherry and I hear a sherry I've never tried. I'm like, yeah, I'll pour that. Absolutely, that's what I'm here for. Tried a couple of the kind of oddballs. The Big Peat Christmas 2019, which I have a special place in my heart for Big Peat. 53.7%. It was actually quite balanced, believe it or not, for being Big Peat, which is as big as peat as you can get into a bottle. I also tried the Millstone, which I believe, so Millstone is a Dutch distillery of all things. I found really interesting, and it's a peated Pedro Jimenez and 46. It's 46% ABV, and it was interesting. It was a little young, but whatever. I'm there to try different releases. I tried the third release from the local distillery here, Eau Claire, which started distilling however many years ago. It was okay. It was what you would expect out of a young whiskey from a new distillery. So kind of rough around the edges, but fun to try. And then two really nice whiskeys. And I didn't write down all the specs, but it's the Scotch Malt Whisky Society 5.63, which is an Auchentoshan. And it was a really, really good Auchentoshan. This might have been one of the better Auchentoshans I've ever tasted. And the Scotch Malt Whisky Society 72.65, which is a Milton Duff. And I haven't really had a lot of Milton Duff stuff. That's hilarious. But
I've never heard of this distillery.
Yeah, it's just a distillery that isn't really on my radar because whatever, I just don't pick up a lot of their bottles. But I'm at this point I could pretty much pour something from the Malt Society blind and be happy because I think for the most part, you're just splitting hairs really. So it's all good stuff. And like I said, I have a big whiskey tasting tomorrow, so I'll try and write down all my notes because I'm sure I'll have 15, 16. I don't know how many tastings I'm going to do. I have to work on Friday, so this is...
Are they going to have food there?
I hope so.
Yeah. I mean, usually at those whiskey tasting events, they'll have some charcuterie place or something of that nature. So.
Cheese and whatnot.
Yeah.
So it's been a good few weeks, gotten a lot of tastings in. Finished off my bottle of Yamazaki 12. Finished off a bottle of the small batch Teeling. So I've crushed a number of sort of low bottles. The Yami was a little disappointing. Perfect example of where something had I let it go down too low for too long. So it kind of lost a lot of its character. So warning for those at home, once it gets past the halfway point, you kind of want to just finish it at that point. I mean, you don't really want to guzzle it, but you can't really leave it for too long. Like a year is probably too long. At that point, it's going to decline every couple of months from what it originally was. And when I drank the heel of it, it was just like, it was okay, but it wasn't great.
Yeah. Or you could, I know some people will transfer it into a smaller bottle.
Oh yeah, that's a good idea as well.
So,
yeah,
some people do that, and some people, if it's one of those more like special whiskeys that you don't drink very often, you could also buy like parafilm and then film wrap it around the neck and cap, of course.
Or you can do the I use nitrogen in some of my higher end bottles as well because it's inert, which is used a lot in wine, high end wine, so port and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So yeah,
there's several things, but at the end of the day, like if the fill's low, like if you like the way it tastes, right, drink it because you want that lasting memory of that bottle to be good, not like it was low fill, it wasn't that good.
Yeah. So we'll get into some libation news. I'll just kind of bang off some of the top libation news. Now, granted, this goes back, a couple weeks, but one of the top ones was Brew Dog, which it's a pretty big distillery, and big enough that Brew Dog sold its Hop Hub distribution. So it's got a global distribution center. It's obviously quite large because they sold it for 10 million UK pounds to a US-based investment fund. This news comes to us from insider.co.uk. And so it's I guess it says a 20-year lease. And the lease company, the company that bought it out, has $100 billion worth of US dollars of assets under their management. The property itself is 129,000 square feet. So, yikes! That's quite the sell-off. I don't know what they haven't really announced what they're going to do with those funds. Perhaps they're looking to expand in some other way, or maybe they just need to raise capital. But that's not something you see a lot in the brewing industry.
Yeah, that's especially someone like Brew Dog, in which I don't know. I guess for the right price, anyone's gonna sell. So I guess you should never be surprised when a brewery gets gobbled up by someone that's bigger.
Oh, and
Um,
interestingly, it says here. So I kind of misread it. So,
mm.
they sold it, and then the investment company is actually going to lease it back to them for a 20-year lease. So that's kind of
Oh,
curious. So I guess that
okay,
definitely
interesting.
strikes me as we need some cash flow.
Yeah, yeah, it might be a capital
Might
play,
be the
right?
capital play. Cool
Huh,
though.
interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I hope they really hold true to the brewing techniques and what they want to do in furthering their brewery instead of letting the money guys tell them what to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
So hopefully.
I actually have you had much BrewDog? I don't. I mean,
I
I see
have.
it here for sure. I don't really drink much of it though.
I've had a few. I think there's some. I don't really follow all the, these are the breweries we're supposed to hate. I feel like
Oh,
BrewDog is on a list somewhere of like we don't like this craft brewery for some reason. But I don't really pay attention to that. I mean, maybe I should. But I have had a bunch of their stuff because I think just because distribution in Canada is easy. So yeah, I've had a bunch of BrewDog stuff and I liked it. I think they make good stuff. So
hmm.
yeah,
All right.
yeah. Next up, we've got the treasure. So this comes via CNN of all places. I always love reading these, even though they're probably a bit silly. The treasure hunters found a World War I shipwreck, and the liquor in it is still sealed. So I guess it's 102 years old. It was a Swedish steamer. It's been sitting in about 250 feet of water, and they actually recovered 600 bottles of cognac, and I think cognac does age in the bottle, and 300 bottles of whatever they call Benedictine liquor, which is a brand now owned by Bacardi. So I'll have to look and see if there's a follow up news story on this because they said in the original story that they didn't know if it was undrinkable. They said that the Benedictine bottles kind of smells of sweet and herbal.
Huh.
But it's tough to say with something that's been in water for that long whether it's still going to be drinkable or not. But kind of cool,
Hmm.
Kind of everyone likes some buried treasure, right?
I mean, too bad you. I'm probably no one's gonna be able to taste these, right?
Probably not.
They're just gonna go to like some museum, but to know that they've been in the ocean under all those conditions of salt water and all that, and to still be recovered and in its good shape, no, it's kind of surprising.
Yeah. Last but not least, and I think you heard this news firsthand. So Glencairn was launching a black Glencairn glass.
People go ape shit about this one.
Yeah, I was going a little crazy about it myself. I kind of got caught up in the hype. Unfortunately, as I predicted, the website crashed. I was trying to get my hands on a bunch of them and bring some to Vegas and whatnot, but sadly, the website crashed. And I tried for about 4 hours, and just it would not let me purchase. Fortunately, the good people at Glencairn sorted it all out afterwards, reached out to me and said, hey, would you like to still buy some? And I said, well, yeah. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to get the quantity that I wanted. And I had to pay a little bit in shipping, which was going to be offset by the number of glasses I was looking to pick up. But all of that to say, I did get my hands on one of the black Glencairns, and it's a teaser because I'm sure we'll feature it on an upcoming show when we do some tasting while we're talking, and I'll kind of show off the sexy black. It's kind of one of those things where it's interesting. I'm not sure how practical it is because obviously you can't see the spirit. So maybe if I'm doing some blind tastings, it's kind of interesting. But
Hmm.
whatever. I've also got a blue glass to go with it as well. The blue glass is kind of semi-transparent. So
You know what kind of glass I want in the Glencairn? The one where I don't even know what that style is called, but like will they like etch like that little
Oh,
cross look.
yeah, I've got one of
Uh,
those.
I don't know. I like that look.
It's
Like I
yeah.
either like that kind of look or I like one of those like stemmed like tulip
Oh,
looking
yeah, yeah,
glasses
yeah.
to drink whiskey out of.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I ended up picking up a pair of the like you see the cut ones. They're not cheap, but I kind of save that as my, if I'm pouring something really crazy high end expensive, it just makes me feel more decadent and elegant to pour it in, the crazy high end Glencairn glass. I don't know why, but I'll maybe I'll bust that out on a future show too when we're doing some 21-year-old or whatever.
Hmm.
So that's all I got this week. What about you?
Um, in terms of news,
Yeah.
like libation
Yeah.
news, not much. I mean, I've actually been drinking more than ever. Um, which is interesting because I also had to work a decent share of the holidays. So it wasn't exactly like happy holidays,
Yeah.
like 2 week break that probably most Americans get off
Yeah.
from work. But I mean, oh, I was gonna say something that we should tell the audiences.
Oh, yes.
I think in the future for these shows, I think we might do a little pivot, and then perhaps do some shows in which we're doing like a live tasting, and we could talk about various libations and what we taste, and perhaps also since we also are cigar guys, perhaps we could give some recommendations for what cigars may pair
Mhm.
well with our specific libations that we're having.
We're also going to have some guests on, including, I think, hopefully our first guest will be Big Tuna, Seth Geiss.
Yeah.
For those who used to follow him on What Embargo, he's going to make a return to the airwaves, at least on the little shows like this, because Seth is kind of a bourbon fiend. So,
Yeah, he's become one,
mhm.
and he's equally also a bit white trash and drink quite a bit of White Claws as well.
He likes the White Claw, and he also loves the wine as well. So, yeah, we got him cornered.
But yeah, but if you guys have any suggestions, by all means, let us know. If you have any questions, if you have any suggestions in terms of what to pair with what, or what to talk about, what to drink, whatever, shoot us an email.
Yeah. Cool beans. All right. Well, that'll take us another episode. This was episode 15 of Pour and Tell. We'll be back in 2 weeks, and check it out.